Thank you for attending the PICS University webinar on the top 10 loss control tips for 2013. My name is Catherine Gutierrez and I will be the host for the meeting. Your presenter will be Dennis Truitt. Dennis comes to us with more than 20 years of experience in safety and health, having also worked in the environmental section as well. We will begin the presentation by discussing how to ask a question. To ask a question, simply open the chat panel. In the Send To drop-down list, select the host, enter a message into the text box, and if you have a Windows system, click Send. If you have a Mac system, click Enter. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. At that time, Dennis will turn the time back to me. I will ask the questions, and Dennis will answer each question. Now I'd like to turn the time over to Dennis Truitt to begin our webinar on the top 10 loss control tips for 2013.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's a wonderful day, and I hope that everybody has an opportunity to take something away from this. So we'll talk a little bit about a few questions to get us started, and then we'll get right into the top 10 tips for this year. What is loss control? Loss control is obviously anything that we can perform, we can share, we can communicate, we can perform and behave in certain aspects that will allow us to reduce or eliminate loss in our facilities. Now that loss can be any form of loss. It's not just human loss. It's not just property, process, profit, and things of that nature. It can be anything that is a direct or an indirect loss. And so we'll take a look at some of those things and how they can impact our facilities and our bottom line as we move forward. Why is it important for us to be concerned with loss control? Obviously, it impacts everything we do. Everything that we perform, every function at the facility has an impact or has the capability to have that impact. Who's involved in preventing loss? This is everyone. This is everyone from the last employee that just hired on yesterday to the longest employee we've had with the facility and our upper management and our brass. So everybody can play a participating part in this, and we encourage, obviously, everyone to take part in it. So let's move on and talk about what are some of the top 10 loss control tips for the year. The first one we're going to talk about is hazard identification mitigation. This is obviously a big kind of global, high-level look at everything that goes on in our plants and facilities. Everyone needs to be on the same page. So when we talk about hazard identification mitigation, we want to make sure that everybody that is joining the organization, everybody that's participating in any of the functions that we perform that are loss control driven, all have a play or a say in that. Everyone engage in some activity that will promote the right behavior. We want to obviously make sure that everybody is moving in the right direction and that those behaviors are being modeled appropriately. Doesn't matter where you are with your programs. Any time is a good time for safety. That's a little cliche, but it is true. It's very true. No matter where you're at in your stage of your safety program, making sure that your hazard identification mitigation techniques, making sure that you take a look at every aspect of hazards that may be present in your facility, in your work environment, are all opportunities for loss control. Again, to finish this slide off, you do not need world-class safety programs. You can just be starting safety, and even a little improvement will make a huge difference. So no matter where you're at in your process, whether you have a long-term robust safety program that's been in place for years and years, and your employees and your contract workforce are very comfortable with it, that's fantastic. But even if you don't have anything, any time is a good time to start, and any improvement will make an adjustment in safety. All right, let's move on to number 2, job hazard analysis. Most of you are probably familiar with this term. It's been around for quite a while, but JHAs are very popular and obviously a very effective tool in getting everybody engaged in the process of identifying those hazards and identifying the opportunities to mitigate those hazards. So we recommend, obviously, that when you're starting out, use a standard checklist. And that standard checklist initially is going to get everyone on the same page and comfortable using that tool. That tool should be an easy tool to use. It should not be a tool that becomes a hazard to the people using it on the job. But once you have a standard and the comfort level is high, then you can start to modify and meet more specific needs. And you may even go so far as to creating JHAs or job hazard analysis for each task. Now that's a daunting task, obviously, to identify each of those tasks and to have a JHA specific to it. But as your program becomes more robust and as you start to move into the process for which you want to start to drill down into exactly what hazards are present for each of the tasks, that's a good way of going about it. And ultimately, let's remember our desired outcome is back to our first tip, and that's good, sound hazard identification mitigation with the emphasis on preventing incidents in the first place. If we can do that, we've moved into a position where we can see more clearly what's coming our way and how to prevent those from occurring. All right, number 3 is hand-finger safety programs. I think most of you will probably agree with me on this, that even when we have really robust glove improvement programs, campaigns, safety processes, new programs we roll out to increase hand and finger safety, we still see hand and fingers as the most common body part injured at work. Heavy industry body part analysis. We've got a little some statistics here. In the heavy industry, it is the #1 body part injured. When we compare it to other body parts that are injured, we see that hands and fingers typically are weighting the scales at the 20 to 25% range. A couple other things to keep in mind with hand and finger safety. This body part also sits very high on the list of body parts that result in recordable injuries. So unfortunately, not only are hand and finger injuries topping the list on body parts, but they also oftentimes tip the charts with recordable. It's not untypical at all, and we do see this in the industry, to see about 35% when compared to other body parts. So obviously it's a very good opportunity to direct safety at a particular body part, at a particular case of behavior, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So some of the keys to success for this: implement a program for hazard recognition, hazard assessment, determine the needs. You know, where in your facility, where in your plants, at the sites are the pinch points, where are the hot spots. We've identified rotating equipment, automated machinery. Those are obviously going to be places where human interaction becomes one and necessary with the machinery. Proper use and care and limitations of PPE. So this is a big thing, right? I mean, we have to identify all the limitations that the PPE has. Even with the best glove technology that's out there, we're still going to have opportunities where the hands are going to get into precarious situations and potentially injured. So we've got some opportunities. We can engineer some of those hazards out, put in some engineering controls, put in the machine guarding, make sure the machine guarding is being used, ensure all those safety switches are being implemented, being used, the two-handed trip or the dead man switches, electronic safety eyes, pusher tools. All these things can be opportunities to, again, put the hand and finger away from the potential hazard. Hand complacency, we often just simply assume people know how to take care of their hands. They're such a widely used tool for us as humans. We use them every day in almost everything we do, and we assume that oftentimes people have that kind of in their nature to take care of their hands. But we've seen from the injuries and from the statistics that that's not always the case. So what do we need to do? We need to increase that positive behavior, increase that awareness of the hand and finger safety, and ultimately bring those processes to the point where we can ensure that that mitigation is being taken care of. All right, number 4 on our list, eye injury safety programs. And again, just like hand and finger injuries, this one runs high on the list. In fact, eye injuries remain very high in most injury body parts analysis. They'll show that they're number 2 to the fingers and hands. We typically see about 15% of eye injuries when compared to other body parts. Other parts, you know, things like your back and your neck and your elbows and your legs and the strains and the sprains and the other things that happen, we typically see those body parts falling into the less than 10% category. Most involve failing to wear. So obviously this is a case where good hazard identification mitigation techniques, good sound safety programs can definitely bring us back to a place where as long as we're wearing the eye protection, we have a better chance of fighting any of the potential injuries that are out there. So when most of the analysis is done, we found that simply those folks that have removed the eyewear or aren't wearing them properly could have some potential problems there. Obviously, there's some areas where some involve the wrong type. So, we want to identify what those hazards are presented to us and what types of eye protection we need to wear. So we can do a hazard assessment to determine that need. We can look around our plants and facilities and client sites and determine where's the impact, where's the potential for heat, chemicals, dust, optical radiation, the things that we're going to come in constant contact with in most of the plants. Now, a lot of the heavy industry plants, there's minimum requirements for these types of things, and we suggest that obviously any time that you've identified that hazard, you take it to the point where you think that you can prevent all those injuries from happening, and then after that, the proper PPE is being worn, and sensitive behavior then that we work with the employees to ensure they understand it. They need to know obviously when and what type to wear and the limitations of the PPE. As we know, there are certain cases where even double eye protection is required, and in certain situations where those kind of hazards present themselves, we've got to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more robust with our programs. Look for changes in the work environment, not just light and dark situations, but even those folks that wear contact lenses or any of their prescription lenses, they're going to be dealing with double eye protection in some cases, and fogging conditions can happen. And most of you are aware that it's not just a situation of as the light and dark situations change, we've got other opportunities for folks to engage in that behavior. Provide sufficient training. Obviously, this is a big thing. This is a big thing in all categories when we talk about any of our hazard identification mitigation techniques. Body parts are those that we've done the analysis on and determined that we need to have better programs for. So as we continue to increase those programs and improve those programs, the training is going to be awful critical for everyone involved in that process. All right, number 5 on the list, slips, trips, and falls. This is obviously a big one, and my first bullet point up there, you don't have to be an industrial, chemical, or process-driven work environment to have incidents in this category. These are obviously incidents that can occur in any work environment, whether it's a small warehouse shop that houses a couple of employees that are moving material and equipment around, up to full-blown chemical and refinery process areas where we're dealing with not only potentially moist situations, but spills and things of that nature. It is the most common cause of fatalities in the home. So obviously we know this is a big one. As people fall and slip and trip, there is a serious consequence. It can't happen anywhere, so we need to prepare and plan. We need to recognize, identify, and mitigate when possible, and we need to understand fall prevention. Obviously, this is a big one, understanding the fall prevention that's available to you. There's numerous opportunities to engage in the processes for ensuring that you've identified the hazards, but then there are some opportunities also with PPE and some of the engineering controls to put in place there also to ensure that folks aren't slipping and tripping and falling in the work environment. Choose the right equipment for the job. Obviously, one of the biggest things we can do is good housekeeping. Those good housekeeping efforts are going to ensure that the work environment, the flooring, the working surfaces, the walking working surfaces are all free of hazards and mitigated from those potential slips and trips. Inspection of equipment prior to use is a big one. Understanding your basic mechanics of the equipment and knowing the limitations of equipment. You'll see that this is obviously one of the overriding factors when we talk about any of these tips is knowing the limitations of equipment. If we're going to rely on equipment in some cases to help us or to prevent some of these issues from occurring, then we want to know what those limitations are. And we want to make sure our employees and our contract employees understand those limitations also. Number 6 is hazard awareness specific to your plant, facility, and process. These top 10 tips that I've chosen today to review with you can obviously be implemented in any process in any work environment. They're not necessarily specific to a heavy industry or a process or a chemically driven program, but they can be used even in your administrative working environment. So keep those in mind, and also when you get to the point of where you're identifying those hazards that are present in your work environment, you understand what some of those issues are. So we've got the HAZCOM program and the standards that rely around, that surround that, identifying those potential chemicals and exposures that our employees may be exposed to. We've got PSM, or process safety management in some cases, process hazard analysis. Those areas of the standards that would require those facilities that fall under those categories, or those have those programs in place. And then any other specific site-specific hazards, site-specific issues you may deal with. Make sure that we identify what are the risks involved, where are the areas for opportunity for injury or for incident, and again, back to the employee training and ensuring that all employees understand exactly what those hazards are that they're presented. Number 7 on our list is the emergency action plans. If you're in a facility that requires emergency action plans, this is a big one. Everyone needs to understand what the roles in the event are. Everyone, for the majority of the personnel, this comes down to knowing where the muster points are and how to safely arrive at the evacuation zone. So this is a big thing. Obviously, if there's an emergency in the plant, there are people that are trained. There are people that are members of the ERT that will go into action and ensure that the plan is being taken care of per the protocol set up under your emergency action plans. But those folks that aren't involved in it, we want to make sure that they safely arrive at the evacuation zones, a proper head count is taken, and those folks are safely moved into the areas where they will not be affected by the emergency. Your best defense and your site orientation and or your unit process maps with evacuation routes and emergency equipment. Obviously, those site orientations that you all provide to your contract workforce are invaluable and extremely important, so that they understand exactly what their role is in an emergency and where to move to and how to appropriately get out of harm's way. Small booklets are very popular, as are posters and signs to assist with the direction during the emergency. These are all things that, depending on the size of your plant, depending on the complexity of your plant and the processes involved, how involved you will be with the emergency action plans. But nonetheless, they all are an important role, and even if you're in an administrative office, a simple evacuation route should an emergency occur in the building or near the building is appropriate to allow your employees to be removed from those hazards. All right, number 8, leveraging leading indicators. Obviously a big thing, and don't get me wrong, our lagging indicators have a place, and they will always have a place in our industry when we look at post-incident analysis, post-incident statistics, all those things that we can gauge not only performance but compare others to peer groups and necessary statistical analysis. But as we start to move into looking at leading indicators, obviously these are all the things that will help us pre-incident, pre-contact, pre-pinch point, however you want to look at it, but we've got these opportunities. So as we use pre-use inspections, we can take a look at the vehicles and the mobile equipment on site. We can go into our tool programs, all the hand tools, all the major tools, any of the tools that are on program, any of those pre-use inspections will be extremely critical to ensure that the folks are using the right tools and not any of the tools that should be taken out of service or in disrepair. Our PM programs are preventative maintenance programs, ensuring that any of the PM programs are all in place. And then anything that is broken, anything that is in a state of non-use should be tagged and taken out of service. All those types of identifiers can help us in the leveraging of the leading indicators. Job site inspections, tremendous tool there. You can go back to your JHAs and your job hazard analysis and tie those in together. Your toolbox and tailgate meetings, excellent way of identifying any of the hazards that may be present on the job today, giving folks an opportunity to mitigate some of those hazards today and ensuring that any of the tasks that are covered have been trained and folks have been brought to speed on where we're at. Safety management systems, obviously any of the systems that you have in place that include any of the opportunities to identify those hazards are opportunities to again, engage in the leading indicator form of identifying those hazards before they become an incident or before they become a statistic. Your quality programs, your QA/QC programs, those are obviously all going to be put in place to ensure that any of the hazards identified pre-job can be administered. And then employee competency, ensuring that your employees and those around you that are performing these jobs have the skills, crafts, and necessary compliance and or qualification to perform that job. All right, number 9 in our top 10s is effective communication and sharing with contract workforce. Obviously, as many of the big facilities and larger facilities that engage in daily contract workforce become more tied into having that contract workforce perform some of the critical tasks in the plant and the process, we want to make sure that we're communicating effectively with those contractors. We want to make sure that we're sharing information and that a lot of the training and opportunities that we use to identify hazards are being implemented by them also. Contractor safety councils, big thing. Obviously, if you're a plant that utilizes a lot of daily nested contract workforce, we encourage contractor safety councils, whether they're monthly, weekly, or even more greater than that during turnarounds and shutdowns and big projects. You've got the opportunity to communicate with your contractors, share any of that detailed information about hazard identification, mitigation techniques, and any other programs that you've put in place to ensure that your contract workforce is just as knowledgeable and at least engaged in the same processes and the behaviors that your employees are practicing at the facility. Contractor communications, we want to make sure that anything we do is an opportunity to bridge that communication between employee workforce and contract workforce. Again, going back to any of the bullet points that we saw previously, everyone on the same page, engaging in the work activities, positive behavior, all those kinds of things can be shared amongst your contract workforce. Number 10, effective contractor screening. Obviously, you want to make sure that your contractors that are coming into the facility have the proper compliance standards, have the necessary tools, have the necessary competency, things of that nature. Setting the stage for overall site compliance, ensuring that we have folks at the site that understand exactly what we're doing and what our mission is each day to perform the work in a safe manner and leave the working environment in a safe and working order. Give your suppliers the tools they need to be successful. Obviously, we encourage you to not only communicate and share lots of information with your contract workforce, but engage them in a process that will allow a true partnership in the endeavors to ensure a safe working environment. Team up with industry experts to help raise awareness and performance. This is a great tool to obviously get in there and use what's out there. You know, there's all kinds of information out there that's available to us to increase safety at the job site and to increase those communications between contract workforce employees. And we encourage pre-qualification, not disqualification. There's obvious reasons why our clients have chosen particular contractors to work with, and in those cases, any of the compliance standards, any of the education, the knowledge, the behavior-based programs that are being used are all in an effort to encourage that pre-qualification and not the disqualification. So leverage best practices. Obviously, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's all kinds of information out there that's available to us. There's a lot of good information on successful programs that is out there. There's a lot of information that can be implemented site-wide. Join an industry consortium where supplier data is shared. And in PICS, our status for over 10 years, PICS has consulted with and provided supplier management solutions for the most respected companies in the world. There's just a brief listing of some of the companies that we work with, and obviously a lot of the good information that we share and that we gather comes from a lot of these organizations. And when organizations work together, there's an obvious impact and benefits to sharing of compliance, safety programs, and ultimately all the different loss control tips that we can use and encouraged to be utilized and have positive behavior in our plants and facilities.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. That was fantastic. We now reached our question section of the presentation, and so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the chat section here, and we'll see which questions have come in, and we'll see how we can answer those for you. So what I'm going to do, again, my name is Catherine. I'm going to go ahead and I'll read that question to Dennis, and Dennis will answer it. So the first question I think most people have on this presentation is whether the PowerPoint will be available afterwards and whether you'll be able to receive a copy. So that email will come from me personally. We will send out the email following the presentation with a copy of the slides. And do, of course, feel free to reach out to either myself or Dennis directly with any questions that you may develop after this presentation is completed once you have a copy of that presentation. So the second question I have here are, what would you say are the top 2 loss control tips to start with, Dennis?
So obviously the biggest 2 are hazard identification mitigation and a job hazard analysis. If you leverage those 2 components and those 2 elements and really look at what are we presented with on a daily basis in our facilities, I think you'll find that the rest of the information that sort of dovetails and rides the shirt tails of that information will be very useful and helpful for you. But identifying those areas, that hazard identification, those good techniques for mitigation, and then utilizing job hazard analysis, I think those would be your biggest 2, and they were the top 2 on the 10.
Great, thank you. The second question I have is, where else can I find additional information on preventing loss?
So obviously, the internet is a great source of that. I encourage, obviously, any of you safety professionals out there to attend trade shows, conferences, things of that nature. There's a lot of information that's shared in a number of those capacities that will give you all kind of guidance on compliance, good loss control tips, and things of that nature.
Thank you. Can you give an example of double eye protection situations?
So there are a couple different situations where we would see double eye protection. In some of those cases, it's a requirement where simply a safety glasses would be required under a hood or some other version of eye protection or shielding protection from potentially splash in those situations where you might wear a splash shield. Those kinds of things might be considered double eye protection. And in some cases where you're actually wearing contact or prescription lenses on the inside of some other piece of personal protective equipment. And in some of those cases, it may be splash protection, or it may be dust protection, or it may be radiant protection.
Thank you. The next question I have is taking roll call required under OSHA in an evacuation plan or drill?
You know, there's a number of different philosophies out there on that, and really it's a guide for that, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think that if you're in a large facility or plant, you know, my experience, I come from the refining industry, we did head counts at each time to ensure that we knew exactly where everybody was. So I'd have to actually go and look at the standard to determine if that was a requirement or a best practice. But either way, it is an excellent opportunity to ensure that those folks engaged in or simply evacuating from the emergency have a proper head count, and we know where everybody is, including all employees and contract workforce.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to scroll down here really quickly to see if we have any further questions, and we'll wrap things up. And again, I will be sending out the presentation after this meeting concludes. So a next question I have for you are, what are some examples of safety management systems? So
that's a great question, and basically your management systems are going to be your higher level, 50,000-foot level view of things. So how involved is your senior management? How committed is your senior management to your process? Do senior management get involved in audits, whether it's audits of the field, audits of the process? Anything that we're going to look at where we have the opportunity to engage everyone from the organization can be utilized in that system management. And that's really going to come down to each employee being engaged, the management being engaged, utilizing systems that will take a look at the high level, really a lot of those leading indicators, utilizing a lot of those systems.
Great. And our final question is, when using contracted employees, what minimum basic due diligence would you conduct to determine effectiveness of safety culture and track records?
So this is a bit of a loaded question, but it's a great question. So we're going to look at, whenever we look at contract workforce, we want to engage in a level of safety statistical analysis. So we're going to get all the initial information that comes in from contractors. So we are going to capture those lagging indicators. What's their total recordable incident rate? What's their 3-year average? What's their fatality rate? What's their lost work case rate? What's their restricted work case rate? All the things that obviously fall into lagging indicator. But on top of that, we're also going to ask for a safety manual. We want to look and see that a contractor has a safety manual that at least at minimum covers those skills, crafts, tasks, or services that they say they can provide. That's probably one of the biggest things, to ensure that there's a minimum compliance standard and understanding of what they need to perform and how they're going to perform those work services in your facility. Obviously, a next step after that would be to engage them in best practices that you all have at your facilities and plants, so they ensure and understand what those hazards that they may come in contact with or may be exposed to as they come into your work environment.
Dennis, thank you. That was a fantastic review of the questions that we received. I'd like to thank everyone here today for joining us on the Top 10 Loss Control Tips for 2013. You will receive an email shortly from me with a copy of the presentation. And again, if you didn't have a chance to ask your question here today, we'd be happy to take care of that for you. And we will make sure that we do send out that copy of that presentation shortly. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.